Good evening to everybody. Welcome to Congregation KINS's Wednesday evening Chumash Shir. There are Baruch Hashem in Congregation Kins. It's the learning programs are exploding. I must say, nobody's telling me to say this, but this is just one of many options for people to learn, whether everything from Daf Yomi to Pirkei Avot to various other aspects. And may it continue. May all of the Torah learning explode, not only for Kins, but for all of our wonderful Jewish institutions. And in the zechut of that explosion, may another explosion occur in Gaza, killing the people who are evil, while leaving the people who are just caught in the crossfire, leaving them and freeing them from the evil people that are there. Okay. Of course, we have here the this week's parsha is Parshat Vayeshev, Vayeshev, and in it, of course, we find the first of the continuous stories and events of Yosef HaTzadik, and of course, tying his family into it as well. Now, it is important to realize that when we talk about a continuous story, what we mean is, of course, other people appear in just as many parshiot, Moshe Rabbeinu, all of Shemot. Once we have Shemot, everything else, except with the exception of one parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu appears, and not only that, he's the central figure in most of them, the overwhelming majority of them. However, when we refer to a continuous story, we mean to say that these events happen in the manner that event number 2 is predicated on event number 1, and event number 3 is predicated on 2 and 1, 4 is on 3, 2 and 1, so that actually you have a story which is continuous, and each new event is dependent upon the earlier ones. This, and with the exception of maybe the Megillat Esther, this is the only place, or this is the longest consecutive citing of Yosef HaTzadik and of the events that are interrelated. Now, of course, when we talk about, I want to focus today, actually, on the fact that Yosef was on the sale of Yosef, and of course, Chazal talk about various different things that his brothers had a bet din, and they found him to be guilty. It's a Gemara that says that. So, of course, it has great validity, but on a different level, I'd like to explore less the halachic element of it, even though, of course, it's dealt with. I'd like to explore the idea of if these are tzaddikim, it does appear that this is one of the most brutal acts, certainly when it comes to a family, that we have, right? Brothers, 10 of them, because Binyamin was not a part of the sale, 10 brothers selling their brother. And he, of course, we find another very strange concept. When you think about it, Yosef has 2 dreams. And usually, if you know that people don't particularly like you, you don't expose them to things which would make you look, in their eyes, bad, but in your own eyes, great. Yosef has 2 dreams, okay? And those 2 dreams, in each of them, he is the central figure. He is, as it were, the hero, so to speak, if not the hero in the sense of being a savior, but certainly he is the main character, and he is the protagonist of these dreams. And of course, his brothers become infuriated. Not only do his brothers become infuriated, but his own father says, "Are you telling me that your mother and I are going to bow down before you? The sun and the moon representing us. Are you telling us that this is what's going to happen? Now, Rashi, of course, says, your mother couldn't bow down. She passed away long ago. You're 17. She passed away certainly years before. So how is it that the dream itself could actually be actualized? So this entire story is difficult. And then we find that that Yaakov does an extraordinarily difficult thing. First thing he did, of course, was to give Yosef a coat. It doesn't make sense to show such favoritism to one child over the others. And that, of course, instigates a lot of incitement, unhappiness, which Yosef, of course, builds upon. And so the question is Yaakov's behavior as well. On the one hand, Yaakov shows his preference for Yosef. One can understand that. I'm not saying that it necessarily had to be, but the whole story of Rachel Imenu is touching and beautiful and tragic. And so one could understand well how Yaakov never completely got over the passing of Rachel Imenu, and of course the fact that he couldn't bury her at the burial site that he wanted to be able to lie eternally next to her. She was buried along the way to Beit Lechem. By the way, parenthetically, we really don't know for sure where Rachel Imenu is buried. Now, most of us have probably gone, if we've gone to Eretz Yisrael, we have gone to Kever Rachel, or what is called Kever Rachel. And it fits because, number one, tradition tells us that. At least one tradition tells us that. Second reason that we can say that it's Kever Rachel, because the Torah goes into a fairly extensive effort to tell us where it was. Just a little bit away from Beit Lechem, etc. We do know where Beit Lechem is, and therefore, part of our tradition is that that Rachel Imenu was buried at the site, not necessarily in the building or below the building. That building was built by Montefiore, I believe, in the 19th century. I think Montefiore was the one most responsible for that. As for many things, the windmill and other structures in Eretz Yisrael, not only just structures, he actually instigated the first city outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, Mishkanot Sha'ananim, which was roughly in the 1860s. But even so, Montefiore was certainly involved in solidifying the Jewish presence in Eretz Yisrael. So we find that that nevertheless that particular site is contested by none other than the great Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, who was known as the Ketav Kabbalah, and he said, no, I don't think that the burial site of Rachel Imenu is where we see it, south of Yerushalayim, but rather it's north of Yerushalayim. Now, admittedly, this doesn't directly have to do with our parsha, although, of course, remember, our parsha has to do with last week's parsha, and next week's parsha will have to do with this parsha. That's the way this story works. He cites several examples, but one of the powerful examples is that the Medrash tells us that Nebuchadnezzar made Jews go past Rachel Imenu's kever, and of course, she Rachel mevakal baneha, and that they passed her on the way to Babylon. The problem is, though, if that's the case, Rachel Imenu was buried south of Yerushalayim, and Nebuchadnezzar and Bavel is north of Yerushalayim. So they would have to go out of the way a number of miles. Possible, certainly not impossible to me, but that in itself is somewhat perplexing. So we find that nevertheless, what we're going to do is now we're going to deal with Rachel Imenu and the kever, which is there. Please, I hope no one says, well, I'm not going to, if I can't tell it's Rachel Imenu that's there, why would I go? The answer is, first of all, no matter where she's buried, when we go to what we call kever Rachel, it's in that proximity in the area, although I must say they're probably about 15 miles away from each other, but it's the idea that we're going to kever Rachel, not necessarily that she's right under that large stone monument that's there. But in either case, Rachel Imenu is Yosef is the favorite of Yaakov because of Rachel Imenu. Now, then something really strange occurs. The Torah tells us that shortly after the incident of the dreams, when, of course, the ire of the brothers is nearly at its height, the Torah tells us that Yaakov said that he wanted Yosef to go on a mission. Okay, the mission is to see what how his brothers are doing up in Shechem. Now remember, Shechem is about 50 miles away, 45 miles away. That's quite a trek. Not even even if it took him 3 or 4 days to do. Okay, the fact that he should go there. The other problem is he's one person. Was he going to come back now again? And is he going to say, oh, you know what? I found that they're doing a good job, or they're not doing a good job. So that in itself, of course, is problematic. And he sends him alone. Doesn't say he went with anybody else. And if that's the case, even if the brothers were not upset or angry with him, this defies logic that a father would send his beloved son through a very, very difficult path to get to see how the brothers are doing. For that reason, there are those who say that this was one of the few times in human history where free choice was suspended. That Yaakov was not acting on his own, but rather HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulated Yaakov to send Yosef into this perilous situation against all odds for him to return. And the question is why? Well, it appears, Chazal say, that this whole idea was to actualize the dreams. The dreams themselves would foretell the future. And now it has to happen. And so this becomes the means by which the Jews get down to Mitzrayim, ultimately. That it is Yosef whose own life and his actions brought about his tenure in Mitzrayim, and it brought him to have the brothers come to him, and he, in fact, then was sold into Mitzrayim. Now, that is by itself is a difficult thing to say, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, generally speaking, the Rambam begins one of his chief at the very beginning of his writing of Mishnah Torah. He says one of the guiding principles of life is that people have free choice. And he even goes so far as to say a person by his own actions can either assume the character of Moshe Rabbeinu or Yeravam ben Nevat. Reuven ben Nevat becomes the arch enemy within the Jewish camp. He was a traitor to the whole idea of Malchut Beit David. And Moshe and the Rambam says that was done by free will, and that in fact, when we act, the good acts that we do are due to our own choices, and the bad acts that we do are due to bad actions. And as Flip Wilson said many years ago, the devil didn't make you do it; you do it yourselves. And so, therefore, we will have to put that aside. And it is a minority view, but actually, it makes a lot of sense that too much of what Yaakov did in this period of time defies logic. The logic of a father for his son, the logic of a father for his favored son, the logic of a father to give him a coat right in front of everybody, the logic of Yosef to tell his dreams to his brothers. Keep it to yourself. What do you have to tell them for? Why do you have to aggravate the situation? And that's why one of the things that I like to say is Yosef. We call Yosef HaTzadik. He sure didn't seem like a tzaddik, but he also was 17 years old, the Torah tells us. And it's interesting, the Torah tells us specifically he was 17, which means to say that he had, of course, this plays a major role in our understanding of Yosef's behavior and also our admiration of Yosef. Here's a 17-year-old boy who was sold to Mitzrayim, and a woman seeks to curry his favor and perhaps to sleep with him, and he refuses to do it. So it is true that Yosef was, in fact, a tzaddik, but in his early life, before he encountered Eshet Potiphar, he didn't seem to act like a tzaddik, which is, I think, a good evidence that we should be saying to ourselves that, tzaddikim are not made. They're not born. They aren't made by others. That tzaddikim are those people who overcome the obstacles that the rest of us fail to overcome in order to do that which is right, in order to do the right thing. And we will see this, Yosef does this over and over again. And so even though when he was younger, perhaps he made mistakes, serious mistakes, nevertheless, a tzaddik is a person who grows, a person who moves from a relatively lower level to one which is higher spiritually. So that's the story here so far of Yosef getting to Shechem, getting up to Shechem. And as I say, Shechem is about 40 or 50 miles north of Hebron. Hebron is south of Yerushalayim, and he had to go first 17 kilometers or so to get to Yerushalayim, and then from there he has a nice trip till he gets to Shechem. Another thing that we need to know is that Shechem is not, there are two things about Shechem. It is both a city and a district. It is a city and a district. And a city, of course, was not so important to our story, but it is a district where many people brought their flocks. It apparently was fertile, certainly fertile enough for the animals that were brought there to be able to grow and to be nourished. Yosef goes and he meets Gavriel. Chazal identify him. He's an ish, a man. This is what you call a classic cameo performance. That this man, who is really, according to Chazal, Gavriel, comes and Yosef sees him and he says, can you tell me where the people are Ephohem Ro'im? Where are the brothers? Yomer et Achai, Gavriel said to him, Ish, a man found him, meaning found Yosef. It's as if to say that it was preordained. and he was wandering. Yosef was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, Lemor, Matavakesh, what are you looking for? And it's very interesting what Chazal say on the very next pasuk. Vayomer, and Yosef said, Et achai anochi levakesh. I'm looking for my brothers. I'm looking for my brothers. And Chazal pick up on this to say he was looking to reestablish the brotherhood that should have existed within the family. And sometimes an important lesson here is, we always have to be careful when we create a certain degree of dislike or disharmony, because when there's no guarantee that a brotherly relationship can be restored. Very often it's not. So, but Chazal say, at least some Chazal say, when Yosef said, Et achai anochi mevakesh, I am looking for my brothers. Really, I'm looking for my brotherhood, so that we should be together. Hagida nali, tell me, Eifo hem roim. So Gabriel says to him, Nasumizeh, they traveled from here, and we find that the brothers see him from afar, and they said one to the other in Perek Lamed Zion, pasuk Yutet, Vayomru ish el achiv, and they turned to each other and said, Hinei ba'al hachalomot halaveh ba. This dreamer. Notice they still haven't gotten over that dig that they felt when Yosef would share his dreams with them. So he's coming. Now, conclusion. Let's kill him. We'll throw him in one of the pits, and we will say that a wild animal ate him. And Reuven came and said, Lo nakenu nafesh, let us not kill him. All right, after all, he is our brother. The yad al tishlechuvo, that's in pasuk Kavbet. Let's not even harm him. And what was his purpose, Reuven? L'man atzilo tomi adam. Now, Reuven is the oldest of all the brothers, remember. His purpose was to save Yosef and to return him to his father. And then, pasuk Kav Gimel, Vayihi kasher ba Yosef el echav, Yosef approached them, Vayafshitu et Yosef et kutanto. They stripped him of his coat, which again you can see that's the first thing that they did. They did it because this was like red in front of a bull. Vayikachu, they took him. Now let's take a look and see the next psukim. I'm going to ask you the question now: who sold Yosef? They took him. Vayashlichu oto abora. They threw him into the pit. Va'abor reik. The boar itself was perfectly designed, as it were, to kill Yosef through either through lack of water or through, as Rashi says, snakes, scorpions. Va'abor reik ein bo mayim. There was no water, so if they left him there, he would have died of starvation, of dehydration to begin with. Now, let's look what the psukim say here. They sat down. They wanted to eat. First of all, let's sit down. Let's have a meal. Now that they threw him into the pit, they decided they're going to sit down and have a meal. I don't know. It would seem that somebody should be able to say, "I can't really eat while this is happening," but they didn't. They lifted their eyes and saw the Hinei orchot tzadikim yishmaelim ba'am migilad ugmalahem nosim nochos utri volot. They were taking spices. These were nomads, and they were also people who went from place to place to sell their wares. In this case, they had spices. Now, Vayomer Yehuda el Echav, And Yehuda said to his brothers, Ma betza ki naharog et achinu. Rashi says the word betza in Pasuk Kavav is Ma betza ki naharog et achinu. What profit is there in killing him? And we will cover his blood. So he said, "L'chu, come, the nim tereno Yishmaelim. Look, this is perfect. We'll sell him to the Yishmaelim. The Yodenu al Tivo, and we won't have this guilt-laden idea of having killed him. Ki achinu b'sareinu, who after all he is our brother. Vayishma'u echav, and his brothers listen." Now, interesting, by the way. Notice the difference between the written word and the oral word. I could put the emphasis on this any way that I want. After all, he is our brother. Or it could be because after all, he's our brother, and we don't. There's no. Why should we feel guilty? Okay. Well, let's if we have this different plot and attached, we can get away without causing the difficulty of our conscience. Now the next thing you have to see is Pasuk Kaf Chet. Right? Pasuk Kaf Chet, it says, please listen carefully. Remember, all pronouns are ambiguous. He, she, it, we, you, they, I. These are all pronouns. A pronoun, by definition, is a word used in place of a noun. And once you do that, of course, you insert a degree of uncertainty in the situation. So watch. No names are given here. Vayavru anashim, other than the foreign entities. Vayavru, in the interim period, Vayavru anashim midyanim. Midianite people came, socharim, they themselves were merchants. Now, Vayim shechu, and they drew. Vayalu et Yosef, and they pulled and they lifted Yosef min abor. Vayim karu et Yosef vayishmaelim, and they sold Yosef to the Yishmaelim be'eshrim kosef. Vayaviu et Yosef mitzrayma, and they brought Yosef to Egypt. Who pulled him out of the pit? If you want to say it's the brothers, they're not mentioned at all. Now we have a general rule of trying to solve who did an act with this pronoun, and we go to what we call the antecedent, the last known noun, and it seems to be the Midyanim in Pasuk Kavchet. Vayavru anashim Midyanim socharim. These Midyanim, they passed. Then the next verb is Vayim shechu, they drew, Vayalu, and they lifted him up at Yosef min abor. Vayim karu et Yosef vayishmaelim. They sold him be'eshrim kasef. Vayaviu et Yosef mitzrayma. Who did this? We don't know. With certainty, we don't know. Now we do know that later on, Yosef says, "Ani Yosef asher machartem oti." You sold me to Mitzrayim. When Yosef finally reveals himself at the end of this remarkable saga, so it would seem what? That the brothers sold him. But it doesn't say that they did. So you'll say, come on, don't, it seems obvious. It's not so obvious. And I think one of the questions a student asked me many years ago, they said, well, why wouldn't the Torah just tell us? Who sold him? Who sold him? If it wasn't the brothers, tell us it wasn't the brothers. I think the answer, or one answer to this very powerful question is, when we're dealing with a story like this, where people actually set up a situation where they themselves, they made it possible for him to be sold. People that work like this are guilty, even if they didn't touch him anymore. It's the person that makes the avera possible. That's the person that is held responsible. In this case, the brothers, except for Binyamin, threw Yosef into the pit. And when that happened, they now become responsible for whatever happens, whatever follows. Important lesson in life, that the ones who set things up are the ones who either get credit or they can get blamed. And this is one of the interesting aspects of Yosef's story. Again, even though Yosef says, "You sold me," what he certainly could have meant very, very easily, "You made it possible. I wouldn't have been sold were it not for you." So we'll stop here today. We can actually pick up next week. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Hanukkah, a meaningful Hanukkah, and Bezrat Hashem, we can meet next week. No reason why not. And wish everybody a good Shabbos. Bye-bye.
Good Shabbos. Good
Have a good
Hanukkah.
Shabbos. Have a good Shabbos, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.